I think the coverage has been shocking. I struggle to watch the ABC. This is a place where I spent nearly 10 years, millions of dollars spent during the election to demonise the Greens and our position standing staunchly against this genocide.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome to another episode of TBN. Today we have Sophie Mcneil in our studio. Thank you for coming, Sophie.
Thank you for having me, Sheikh Mohammed.
Sophie is an accomplished Australian journalist and politician, currently serving as a member of the Western Australian Legislative Council for the Greens in WA, known for her impactful reporting from conflict zones across the Middle East, including Iraq, Syria and Gaza. Sophie has dedicated her career to highlighting human rights issues. As a former reporter for the ABC as well as SBS and a senior campaigner for the Human Rights Watch, her investigative work has earned her numerous accolades, including a Walkley Award for her coverage of civilian casualties in Afghanistan. Sophie, welcome to our studio.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell us a bit of your experience? You've seen a lot of the world, a lot of the conflict zones. What was your most interesting challenge?
I became a journalist because I wanted to change the world. You could say it was idealistic, but that's always been at the heart of everything that I've ever done. So I left Perth at quite a young age, at 18. You grow up in this isolated city, far away from the rest of the world, and if you are fascinated by everything that goes on overseas, you feel very far away. You feel pretty isolated and away from all the action. So I wanted to go and see what was happening, because I was at high school when the Tampa happened. I was really outraged by the Howard government's treatment of refugees. I learnt about the Second Intifada. I'd never had any connection to Palestine, but I could just see from what was on the SBS World News that I used to watch every night with my mum how unjust the world seemed, particularly for people in the Middle East. So I just kind of set my heart on going there, and ran off to the SBS newsroom. I had a contact there, and they hired me to go and start working for them. I was quite young, I was only 18, and then I ended up in Beirut, and the Middle East was really where I wanted to be, because the Iraq war was happening. I'd seen the treatment of asylum seekers in Australia, and I just felt like this was just, the people there were bearing the brunt of these horrific policies carried out by governments. Yes. And I thought that if I went there and, doing reportage that showed the truth and showed the impact, that could make a difference. And so, I did that for nearly 2 decades. So SBS, and then I was the ABC's Middle East correspondent. Yep. I got frustrated by the limitations of journalism, which I can go into, so I went into advocacy, working for Human Rights Watch. Okay. Still got frustrated. And so I think I've tried many different ways of changing the world, right? Yep. And, first I showed the politicians on the news the horror. Then, as an advocate, I'd go and sit in front of the politicians and brief ministers about things. Yeah. They still didn't listen, Sheikh. So then I decided I just have to take their seats. Yeah. And so that's what made me decide to run for Parliament for the Greens, because for me, I felt like the Greens were the only voice that really stood up for human rights, stood up for international law, and demanded the fair and equal treatment of everyone, everywhere, for everyone's rights to be respected. So for someone who devoted my life to human rights, they were the natural choice for me to go into politics for, because I feel like they're the party for human rights.
Talking about media, how influential is the media to actually bring to the forefront the issues that are happening in the world and to tell it as it is, truthfully?
What I think is fascinating is just how irrelevant the mainstream media are now with this war. And, to their shame, they have, I think the coverage has been shocking. I struggle to watch the ABC. This is a place where I spent nearly 10 years. I risked my life to tell the truth for the ABC and to the Australian people in the Middle East. Yeah. And now I can't bear to watch much of their coverage, because I just find it so, this idea of false equivalence, So I heard a radio report this morning where it was about the latest deaths at these aid distribution centres by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. We've heard from the International Committee of the Red Cross, from MSF, that nearly, I think it's 800 people have been killed. Wow. just in the past month receiving aid from this terrible US and Israeli aid distribution model. And the first line from the ABC reporter this morning said, oh, the Israeli army denied the deaths. And I just thought, 20 months into this genocide, is that how you start a report? I mean, we all know, A, that they lie, and B, that numerous credible independent sources have found them liable for so many deaths that they deny, whether it's Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, UN experts, International Court of Justice, ICC. So, I get really frustrated because I became a journalist to be a voice for the voiceless, to tell the story of the people who weren't getting their voices told.
Correct.
And when we haven't seen that with Gaza. But the upside, I think, is that we've seen the empowerment of local voices on the ground. These brave Palestinian journalists, more than 230 who've been killed. The accusation is that it's deliberate targeting, and you would think it is after that many killed. And that's what the International Committee for Journalists believes.
And how important is that? Because they don't allow any other journalists inside, so you have to rely on local journalists. You
have to, but I like that because you get the real story from the local journalists, right? So what I began to feel at the end of my career in journalism is that it actually feels like quite a colonial exercise. This white person flying in and telling you what's happening. So I think that the fact that we now get the story directly from the Palestinians on the ground impacted. You don't need a foreigner to come in and tell you what's happening. We have all our amazing heroes from Gaza. People like Wissam and so many who've been killed. Wael from Al Jazeera and his family
enough coverage
killed.
has been
not enough coverage and not enough solidarity from Western journalists for their colleagues.
Yes.
There's a few exceptions who have been pointing out the horror, but on the whole, it's been deeply disappointing. And I don't know how many journalists can live with themselves at the moment. So it's a very damning time for Western journalism, that's for sure.
So you became disillusioned with the media. So you sort of I think you went into politics after that?
Well, I went into advocacy, Human Rights Watch. So just kind of, because I didn't want to just tell you that, the Israelis said this and the Palestinians said that. I wanted to say, hey, Israel is committing the crime of apartheid. That's a report that Human Rights Watch issued when I was working for them. It was a landmark report, more than 300 pages. It had taken years to write, and they said, we've looked at all the evidence, and Israel is committing that crime. It's it's a crime against humanity, and we have all the evidence. So I wanted to be on the side of international law. I wanted to be on the right side of history because I'd met so many people during my time in the Middle East who were advocates, who were brave Syrians, who were thrown in jail for standing up to the Assad regime, or Palestinians who risked their life to speak out and talk about what the Israelis were doing, or Yemeni human rights advocates who were locked up by the Houthis. Like, there's so many people. Egyptian, I was in Egypt when several dictators threw people into jail, whether it was Mubarak or then his replacement. So I just had met so many brave people who stood up for human rights, and I wanted to try and be like them. So they're my heroes.
Yes. One of the things that the Palestinian advocacy may have achieved now is that, by and large, the world, the common person, the average civilian, have become aware of what's happening in Gaza, as before they haven't been. But now there's an effort to silence any criticism of the Israeli government and the state of Israel. You can see that there are laws enacted. In the UK, they have banned Palestine Action. In the US, they've even placed sanctions. Donald Trump has placed sanctions on the UN Special Rapporteur.
Yes, Francesca Albanese.
Francesca Albanese, she's an amazing woman. And now in Australia, we've just had recently recommendations by the Special Envoy to Anti-Semitism to introduce powers, basically, where any criticism of Israel, a person can be deported if they're not a citizen, because the laws of anti-Semitism, the definition that she wants to introduce is very broad and vague, that would allow criticism of Israel to be equivalent to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, look, it's a real concern, and the Greens are, point out all the time that we stand against all forms of discrimination, all racism. We vehemently stand against anti-Semitism. We vehemently stand against Islamophobia. We are a party founded on equality. We want everyone's rights to be upheld, but we are concerned that there is an effort to conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel, because obviously they are two very different things. And so, there are some very concerning recommendations in that report. And my federal colleagues, particularly Maureen Faruqi, who is our spokesperson for anti-racism at a federal level, she's our deputy leader, and she's Muslim herself, and she's put out a very strong statement about how, the Greens want anti-discrimination and anti-racism efforts to be stronger nationally for everybody, because we also recognise that there is a whole bunch of different minority communities across Australia who are facing discrimination and racism. So it is a real concern, and I guess I'm worried about a chilling effect, that people will be too scared to criticise Israel or to go to protests, to speak out against this genocide, because they're worried about being accused of being anti-Semitic.
That's correct. And I don't think that these recommendations will do anything to actually eradicate true anti-Semitism, because people start to realise that this is a political decision.
Well, the thing is, there has been a really alarming rise in anti-Semitism, and so that needs to be addressed. And the government has put money into that, and we support that. But the issue here is conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. That's what's dangerous, and that's what creates a chilling effect. And so that's why we have real issues with that report, and we don't want the government to adopt those recommendations in whole, because I think it creates a really dangerous environment.
But there are also Jews that disagree with that definition of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely, yes.
As Muslims, we look, anti-Semitism is something which is the product of Europe. It's got nothing to do with Muslims. It was exported by the West. And whenever in history the Jews were prosecuted, they used to seek asylum in Muslim lands, and we would welcome them and we would coexist together. There weren't any major issues. But unfortunately now, this strategy of trying to silence the voices, it's actually pitting one group against another. That's one of the risks of doing this.
Yeah, I think there's lots of risks in it, and it's been deeply disappointing to see incidents of violence against Jewish communities across the world in the wake of what's happened in Gaza, and I think that's what's dangerous when you conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And so I think there definitely needs to be action taken to reduce the amounts of anti-Semitism that we're seeing, but I think
What amounts of anti-Semitism are we seeing in Australia?
Oh, look, I think there's been these attacks on synagogues in New South Wales and in Victoria, are deeply alarming. And I think that...
But did they find out who was behind that? Did they find out, if you looked at in the news, even the Dural Caravan incident turned out to be a hoax. And until now, the people that have been arrested for anti-Semitism, there were no ideological reasons for them to be anti-Semitic. That's the history of,
Yeah, I think we haven't seen the results of all these police investigations, but there is a documented rise in the number of incidents.
Incidents are there.
That's for sure, and I think that's really alarming. But I don't think that that policing the way that arts organisations fund certain individuals, or trying to police the ABC, I think that could create a chilling effect where people, might not want to fund an artist who's doing an exhibition about Palestine that's critical of Israel, for example. So it's a fine line, and I think that we will be, the federal Greens will be making those points made very clearly with government about where we think the lines should be drawn.
The reason why I asked you is that are there any incidents of anti-Semitism, true incidents of anti-Semitism in Australia, is because, let's say, we've experienced similar. After 9/11, we had a spike of
Shocking.
Islamophobia. You want to call it Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, sentiment, because of what was being done, allegedly what Muslims had done with regards to the 9/11 incident, right? Now, after that, we had women with scarves pulled off. We had mosques firebombed, similar to, they had a couple of incidents of synagogues there being vandalized. So we've had similar things like this, and this is still ongoing. It still happens. You still get things like that, but it hasn't been made evident in the media or so much. But we believe that the anti-Semitism side of it has very much saturated the media. Now, I'm not trying to get you to, to...
Yeah, well, and this is, I think, all racism is abhorrent, isn't it?
Yes,
no one should ever, it's disgraceful that anyone in Australia should ever face any kind of discrimination. So, yeah, and I think that all that, the efforts to stamp out racism should be funded equally. There shouldn't be a hierarchy of racism, any racism, any discrimination, whether it's, against people for their race, for their gender, for their sexuality. We vehemently stand against all forms of discrimination in the Greens. So, we look forward to a day where everyone can be, feel safe and have their beliefs respected.
Yes, yeah. So, with regards to what happened to us as a Muslim community, we felt compelled to come out and to say, this is not us. This is not our religion. We don't endorse killing of innocent civilians. I feel like other communities have not been asked to do that. We've been asked to condemn ISIS, condemn this, condemn that. But the whole world knows what's happening in Gaza. Apart from the US and a few of their allies, the majority of the world, the global south, and even a large population of the Western citizens living in their respective countries, they also realize that this is a genocide. So the issue is now that how is it that the focus is just on, anti-Semitism? We've been asked, when the media comes to any prominent Muslim, do you condemn? Do you condemn ISIS? Do you condemn Hamas? But there's no one asking, do you condemn what the state of Israel is doing? What do they have to do? Do they have to kill women and children? They've done that. Do they have to starve an entire population? They've done that. Do they have to cut off water, aid, fuel, essentials? They've done all that. What more do they have to do? It's like the message by the Western politicians and the Western media is that, look, Israel, you can do as you like because the world doesn't care anymore,
I think the silence of the world over this genocide is something that I struggle with every day. Every day I know, as you do, I look at my phone and I just have a kind of a sharp intake of my breath, and I can't believe this is still happening. And I think, we will never forgive and we will never forget those who stayed silent during this genocide and those who supported it. And I think it's very hard to be a parent during a genocide because you're trying to teach your children, right and wrong, right? So I have a 14-year-old, I have a 12-year-old, and I'm trying to teach them, to do what I say, to follow the rules. But when you see that, my kids aren't stupid, they can see what's happening in Gaza. They spent many years in Jerusalem. They have, great love of the people there. But how do you teach your kids right and wrong when there is allowed to be 20 months of a horrific genocide and no one stops it? It's really hard, and I struggle with that as, but it's nothing compared to what Palestinians are going through, but I think anyone who has a heart is struggling, to comprehend what's going on in the world.
Yes, that's why you see people in the UK, they're going out to support that Palestine movement organisation.
Palestine Action,
Palestine
Action.
Been
banned.
Yeah, that's been banned. They've actually gone out to support them, and knowing that they'll get arrested and taken away, because now it's an infringement on our rights of freedom of speech. I mean, we used to think the West was a place that celebrated freedom of speech, and they used to criticize the third world countries, the Middle East, that you don't have the freedom of speech there. But when we see what's happening now, it's like, well, we can't criticize a genocide. It's going to become illegal to criticize a genocide. That's the way it's heading. I mean, if that special envoy's recommendations, for the special envoy for anti-Semitism, Gillian Siegel, if her recommendations are accepted as law, which I'm not sure you being in the WA Legislative Assembly, Council, if you can do anything about that from a state perspective, but if that does get passed as law, it's going to be illegal to criticise Israel, is it not, to some extent?
Look, I think a lot of the recommendations are very broad, and that's what's concerning, is that it's not clear. And I think that's deeply concerning. And I think the example of in the UK of the banning of Palestine Action is just shocking. I mean, this is a peaceful, non-violent group. Yes, they break the law, but over the years...
And there are laws for that.
Well,
there are laws for breaking the law.
Many people have had to break the law to achieve social change. Women only got the right to vote because they broke the law. They spent years protesting the suffragettes. Same thing with the US civil rights movement.
They did break the law, Not
South African apartheid. People have broken the law. I would never support any violence.
But they're non-violent. That's the thing. They break the laws, deal with them with the laws that you already have, without having the need to relegate them as terrorists, equivalent to ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Exactly. And so Palestine Action are a peaceful, non-violent group that has committed trespass, and they've damaged weapons factories, but they're not violent. They don't hurt anyone. What they're trying to do is save lives. They want to stop UK weapons exports, because that's something that is just absolutely horrific, is the amount of bombs and weapons that the US and the UK have been supplying to the Israeli military. And these are close allies of Australia, and this is why the Greens are calling for an independent foreign policy. We want an end to AUKUS, because we do not want to align ourselves with countries like the US and the UK who are supporting a genocide. They're arming,
yes, they are.
They're arming the IDF as they carry out these horrific war crimes day after day. So, I think groups like Palestine Action are heroes, and the fact that they are now banned is unbelievable.
You will have citizens forming organisations and taking matters into their own hands due to the failure of the governments to do something meaningful. I mean, like, you have people sending flotillas to Gaza because government won't send aid. This is the initiatives that should be taken by powerful governments. I mean, what are we waiting for? The UN resolutions. We've had countless UN resolutions. We've had the rulings of the ICC, ICJ. So now what's left is just for governments to act, which they're not doing.
Oh, absolutely.
When they're not doing, the civilians are left to do it. And when they do it, now they're being suppressed, they're being arrested, they're being designated as terrorist groups. It's become very difficult now.
Oh, it's unbelievable to think what has happened in the world in the last 20 months. And I think we can't lose sight of humanity, and we can't settle for any of this. Whether it's the human rights of so many millions of Palestinians who have been so abused, and then or the fact that now in our Western democracies we're seeing the undermining of our human rights and our democracy, because we are seeing governments crack down on peaceful, non-violent activism, which aimed at stopping this genocide. So, I think it's hard because everyone's exhausted. Everyone's, it's 20 months of this 20 horror.
Months. Yeah, correct.
But now is, I think, it's more important than ever for us for our movement to stay strong, for people to keep coming out to protest, to keep organising and doing what they can, because,
And for the record, those protests are peaceful, but they have been characterised as hate marches, violent marches, anti-Semitism marches. All types of language has been used so that the onlooker who's watching the media, Western mainstream media, thinks that, these people are, bad news, whereas they're concerned citizens, peacefully protesting. But the way that it's been characterised by politicians and by the Western media is shameful.
Yeah, it's anyone who has come along to our rallies knows that not only are they peaceful, but they are made up of a wonderful, diverse group. We proudly march every time we have an event here in Perth. We proudly march with Jews for Palestine. Who are always at the front of our marches, and it's they're very brave. I have many brave friends who have spent years living in Israel, highlighting the abuses of their government. And that's, that's a very hard job to have. You get persecuted by everyone there. So there are some very brave Jewish voices who've been standing up for Palestinian rights as well. And, we need everybody to join this fight because it is so overwhelming right now, the horror that's going on.
Another point I wanted to mention, if this recommendation is accepted by the Special Envoy of anti-Semitism, universities can be defunded. Funding can be cancelled because of them allowing anti-Semitism in their campuses. And this broad definition of anti-Semitism, like you say, for example, I was reading about it, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, some of the examples they used, for example, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. That phrase doesn't sound bad, right? But by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Now, this part, this is an example of interpreting this principle, that denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. They can actually broadly say, well, if you disagree that there should be a state of Israel because you believe that it's an apartheid state, then that could mean you are anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I think there has been criticism of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism from human rights groups like Amnesty International and from Human Rights Watch. So there's concern at how broad that definition is, and there is concern that that definition conflates anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel, which obviously is an issue. You need to be free to be able to criticize the Israeli government for what they are doing, the genocide that they are carrying out. Again, the point that I made earlier, we think that these broad definitions are dangerous if it means that there is a chilling effect, particularly on young students, who have been, the student movement has been very critical over the last 20 months. We've seen some real leadership on campuses, and that movement, is aimed at critiquing the Israeli government's violence and war crimes in Gaza. That's what those students have been about. Largely, that's what that movement is about. So, it's there. Some of those recommendations are deeply concerning.
And because of this, people are going to be reluctant. They're going to fear that their positions in uni will be jeopardised. If you don't have if you're not an Australian citizen, then your visa could be cancelled. So there's repercussions. So
a chilling impact. I think that's the concern.
What can we do? What can you do? Now you're in politics as a politician, because you've been around the block trying to change the world, from media as a journalist to involving in actually advocacy, human rights groups, and now you've gone around the block. Now you're sitting in the Senate. What can you do to stop unjust laws like this, which will basically silence any criticism of Israel?
Yeah, well, the Greens certainly don't support the IHRA definition, and we have been very loud in voicing our concerns in the wake of this report. But on the whole, the Greens, I think, have shown real leadership on this issue for the last 20 months. We've, from the very, very beginning, we warned what would happen. We said, if you greenlight this invasion, it's going to lead to absolute horror. And
they've greenlighted it already.
Well, and we were, really attacked. We've been attacked the whole time. There was millions of dollars spent during the election to demonise the Greens and our position, standing staunchly against this genocide. But it's not something that we will shy away from, And so, I've only been in there, we've only had a couple of weeks of Parliament sitting since I was elected. When I first entered the chamber in May the 22nd was my first day of sitting after the March election. And, my first day in Parliament, I wore my keffiyeh because I wanted to make a strong statement that even though this is the state Parliament and, we don't run the foreign policy out of Perth, but here I am, an elected member, of this Parliament, a leader in the community. And so it was really important for me to show that I stand against this genocide and that I'm going to use every opportunity I can in that house to make it very, very clear that we need urgent action to stop this genocide. And one of my portfolios is actually the AUKUS portfolio, because I see there's a direct line between the genocide and what's happening in Palestine and our alliance with the US and this plan for us to host this, major US nuclear submarine hub, a base, in my backyard. I live in the city of Coburn, where right next to where this new US nuclear submarine base would be. And, I think that we have to, if you care about the genocide and what's happening in Palestine, you have to start working to stop AUKUS, because that ties us up with the US military, who have no regard for human rights, who have shown, that they will undermine international law at every chance, that they have destroyed international law in the last few years in the the rules-based system. They've absolutely
definitely, they don't go by the rule-based system at all.
Exactly.
It's might is right, basically.
It is, and the consequences of this, we'll pay for it for years. And so, look what the US just did in Iran. That was an illegal war. That was an act of aggression. That was not, that was a preemptive attack that was illegal every which way you look at it. That was an illegal act. And so if we become closer, we're already incredibly close with the US military, but if AUKUS will make us intrinsically intertwined with them, their nuclear submarines will be here. 700 of their forces will be living here. We will become part of the US war machine, our little beautiful part of the world, our quiet part of the world, where many people have come, to escape conflicts in other places. And the last thing that we want for the future of our communities here in the southwest of WA, and for our kids, is to be part of that. We don't want to be part of the US's next illegal war and their next human rights abuses. So that's, a big part of my work in WA State Parliament is to draw attention to this AUKUS deal, to question it, and to do everything I can to delay and stop this from going ahead, because it's an absolutely insane waste of money.
It is.
But it is also just not the right future we want for Western Australia. So that is a big part of my role, and I've been asking a lot of questions about it in Parliament, and we'll be doing a lot of investigations into it with them. Their nuclear submarines will be here. 700 of their forces will be living here. We will become part of the US war machine, our little beautiful part of the world, our quiet part of the world, where many people have come, to escape conflicts in other places. And the last thing that we want for the future of our communities here in the southwest of WA, and for our kids, is to be part of that. We don't want to be part of the US's next illegal war and their next human rights abuses. So that's, a big part of my work in WA State Parliament is to draw attention to this AUKUS deal, to question it, and to do everything I can to delay and stop this from going ahead, because it's an absolutely insane waste of money.
It is.
But it is also just not the right future we want for Western Australia. So that is a big part of my role, and I've been asking a lot of questions about it in Parliament, and we'll be doing a lot of investigations into it.
Malcolm Turnbull also pointed out it's a bad deal because there's a clause that at the end of the day that if US doesn't need those submarines, they can.
Oh yeah, we are so
it's a very
the
one-sided.
Absolutely, it's
power imbalance.
We've already just recently transferred $800 million already for this scheme, and there's no guarantee the submarines are even going to arrive. So it really is. It's a bum deal. Every way you look at it, we lose, and it's just not what we. It's not how we want to. It's not the future we want here in Western Australia.
Okay, that's what you're doing in Western Australia. But if these measures are passed at a federal level, what can we do? Because, Labor Party has the majority. Of course, they can pass any bill that they want.
Well, the Greens have the balance of power in the Senate at a federal level. So, the Greens will, keep fighting at every chance we have to, we've been like the loudest and the only voice in Parliament for a long time calling for action on Gaza. The Albanese government has not taken a single concrete step against the Israeli government. So they've sanctioned 2 individuals, but that's very low-hanging fruit. They have not sanctioned the government as a whole. So, we believe if you can sanction Russia for what they're doing in Ukraine, if you can sanction the Myanmar regime for what they've done to the Rohingya people and that genocide, there are no excuses for not sanctioning the Israeli government. All the evidence is there. It's clear that these are mass human rights abuses, and we need deterrence because nothing is
a peacekeeping force. I mean, Albanese did mention a peacekeeping force for Ukraine. It just whether he's going to follow up with it, but he did mention that it was a possibility. I'm just wondering why no one's mentioned it about Gaza. Because every other measure has not worked.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, we saw in southern Lebanon where there were peacekeepers from all around the world how, they were actually targeted by the Israeli forces when the Israeli forces attacked South Lebanon. Those UN peacekeepers there were not safe. So there were several incidents where they were targeted. So, and part of the problem is that there are no red lines for the IDF. They've been allowed to do whatever they want, and that is just so dangerous because every world leader now is looking at that. There are many dangerous authoritarian leaders all around the world with some terrifying weapons, and if just look what you can get away with these days. That's what I worry about, the precedents that are being set here, and it's just unfathomable.
I think it's time for the greater percentage of the population who are aware of what's happening. I mean, we know the politicians have been lying through their teeth. I mean, sorry, you're a politician now.
I'm not really a politician. I feel like I'm more of a, I'm a truth teller who's just using Parliament as a way to get change.
I like that.
Because there's lots of career politicians in there. There's lots of people that sitting next to me who've never had a job outside of the Labor Party. It's pretty scary to see how many people went kind of straight from university to being a staffer for a politician and then pre-selected to run for the Labor Party, and they have not.
They don't have any values. What motivated them to go into politics? It's just
I'm curious.
Like you say, a career. Yeah.
Well, I just think, why do you want to be in power? What's the issue you care about? What are you so passionate about?
Sure.
Why are you there? Like I can tell you 10 reasons why I'm there, and I get worried about people who just seem to want to be in politics for the power rather than because they actually care about something. So, I'm not a fan of career politicians at all. There's too many of them, I think, in my opinion.
They don't have the numbers, the lobbies that are actually pushing this, but they do have influence. If they had the numbers, I mean, as bad as a Labor government may be to some believe the other side would have been even more worse for the Palestine situation.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's
and they lost badly.
Yeah, and they lost. And people knew that Peter Dutton would have been even weaker when it came to this genocide. So I think that is a sign that the Palestine movement is strong, and I think we just want the Labor Party to now, grow a spine. The Liberal Party are out in the political kind of desert for quite a few years. They're a mess. They have so few seats. So what's standing in Labor's way? They really, really should recognise Palestine. They should sanction Israel.
Corporate donations, you think? What's standing in their way?
I just think they're gutless. I think they're cowards.
No, I think there's more to it than that. There must be some reason for them. There's so much intertwined between lobbyists and funding politicians and,
no, I think
when you say gutless, what have they got to be scared of?
Yeah. No, look, I think that there is a very powerful lobby. When I was a journalist, the Israeli lobby used to attack me for my reporting. There was an ad taken out criticising me in the newspaper. Like there is certainly a concerted effort against people who speak out and tell the truth about Palestine and who criticise the Israeli government. And so I think politicians are scared of that. They are scared of that lobby. And I think that I just think 20 months into this genocide, if you can't call out what's going on, then you really are a coward and you're pretty gutless. And I think we need, we've seen, incredible people like Antoinette Lattouf who've, been vindicated. Yes. So hopefully that gives people courage to speak out, and to really state the fact that they are on the side of human rights and on the side of international law, and that they stand against this genocide, and they want the Israeli government to be held to account for its actions in Gaza.
Yes. So what do you see for us as the road ahead? How can we continue our advocacy for Palestine now with these laws coming up?
Well, I think there aren't any laws currently proposed. Like, that was just one report with recommendations. So I don't want people to get kind of too alarmed right now. The government hasn't accepted them.
And she's not an elected Democrat. She's not an elected politician or anything. It's like, but she wants so much power. It's a bit like Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, and that's terrible. What Elon Musk has been empowering lots of far right groups in America, many who are anti-Semitic as well, and his power is terrifying. So I'm very glad he's out of the US government, but he's started his own political party now. So my gosh, it is a mess, Sheikh. But I think people, should feel heartened by the federal court decision about Antoinette Lattouf that protected people's rights to express political opinion. And people should, also just, I think, look at the global movement. It is clear now that the numbers are on the side of the people speaking out for Palestine, standing with the people of Gaza. We've had millions of people around the world, and it is disheartening that it feels like some days it feels like our movement hasn't had the difference that you want it to have. But slowly and slowly, the world is waking up to what's going on, and the young people of the world definitely, you can't hide the truth from them. Even if the mainstream media isn't reporting what's going on in Gaza, everyone sees it on their phones, anyone with ears and eyes. So I think, we have to stay focused, stay strong, and just keep going, because we can't abandon the people of Gaza. This is more important now than ever to be doing this work.
Sophie Mcneil, thanks for coming to our studio. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Sheikh Mohammed, and everyone. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.